Let's talk about the January shortfall, $22.5 billion. It's been well discussed, well reported. We are now looking in May with a balanced budget of $306 billion, general fund $224 billion, an additional $9.3 billion shortfall. That's made up primarily, not exclusively, of two factors. One, we have seen a shortfall in personal income tax revenue, roughly $3.2 billion, $4.3 billion shortfall from what we projected in January as it relates to corporate tax. We've seen an increase, interestingly, of $100 million in sales tax, about an 8.5 when you add all of the other revenue sources, about an 8.4, billion dollar revenue issue, and this is important, a utilization rate on the expense side of things, not just a revenue side, but on the expense side, higher utilization rate of programs and services in the state than were projected just a number of months ago. Let me highlight two examples. IHSS and Home Support Services, roughly just compared to last year, just on the general fund, it's about $2.3 billion more compared to the Budget Act last year that will be investing in IHSS if this proposal is advanced, 2.5 overall funds. That's just IHSS in terms of its utilization. Also, Medi-Cal and the full scope benefits that we're providing across the spectrum, we're seeing an uptick in terms of enrollment as well. Those are just two, not exclusive list, two examples. So when you add the expense ledger with the revenue ledger and the volatility, unsurprising, the PIT, the personal income tax, and the corporate side, additional shortfall of 9.3. What's that add up to? Just shy, says 32. We round up 31.5 billion. So we have a $31.5 billion challenge, which is well within the margin of expectation and well within our capacity to address. That said, I want to reinforce the point I made in my opening comments around the issues of uncertainty. Perhaps the most consequential is this man-made problem that, of course, is being advanced by a Californian here, the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, that is, once again, seems to only happen when Republicans are in Congress and Democrats are in the White House, manufacturing a crisis around the federal debt ceiling. That impasse continues, and interestingly, and I call this out because I think it's interesting, in many respects it's manifesting earlier than we anticipated because of issues very familiar to all of us, and that's because of delayed tax receipts. There was an estimate that in October we may hit that debt ceiling. Now the expectation from Janet Yellen and others is that will happen sooner. The delayed tax receipts is an uncertainty not just in the macro as it relates to the federal debt ceiling issues, but here in the state of California. We had, as you may recall, serious challenges as it relates to major disaster declarations associated with the floods. Across the country, there were other climate-induced extreme weather events leading to similar major disaster declarations that also impacted their ability to collect tax receipts in a timely manner. As a consequence, the IRS established a relationship to the issues of tax collection, to the issues of these emergencies, and extended through October the tax deadline, which means for all of us, the cash receipts are in doubt. For us, it's roughly $42 billion, and I think this is the actual number. It might be worth writing down. $42 billion of delayed tax receipts. We project, this is imprecise science, it's estimates, $42 billion that will be collected later in the year. So we're going into a budget in a way we've never gone in the budget before. It's impacting, again, the country as it relates to the federal debt ceiling. Interestingly, climate change having an impact on debt ceiling conversations, which has global economic consequences, is just another reminder of how serious the issue of climate policy is. More on that later. But the delayed tax receipts as it relates to California, $42 billion we project in October. That is broken down primarily in two categories: personal income tax, which we project around $28.4 billion, or 32% of all of the personal income tax, or 23%, excuse me, and about 32% of the corporate taxes will projected to be included as receipts in October, making up the balance of the $42 billion. So with that uncertainty, we stack on top two additional. One is around financial institutions and what's happened obviously here in California and across the country, notably in New York. Interest rates, you saw last week, I think it was a 10th interest rate increase since March of 2022. We're at 5.25% interest rates as it relates to credit policies, as it relates to startups, as it relates to the impacts of financial institutions, the direct cause and effect as it relates to SBP and, of course, First Republic. The broader implications are certainly highlighted appropriately here as uncertainties, and, of course, the big one, which is recession. And the question you're going to ask, and I'll just answer so we can get to other questions, is no, we are not modeling in the multi-year or even in the short run a recession, but we are pulling out a deep understanding of even a mild recession in terms of its economic impacts. A mild recession, it's a number familiar to you, about a $20 billion hit in that next fiscal year. A moderate recession, we're looking at an additional $40 billion impact in terms of projected shortfalls. And if you extend that out over a multi-year period, you're in the $100+ billion area. And that is an uncertainty that we must take very soberly and seriously as it relates to the macroeconomic headwinds. You stack everything above that, you stack prospects as it relates to monetary policy and Fed policy and the impacts we're already seeing to the UI and the impacts we're seeing on employment more broadly across this country. You saw those in the newest numbers that just came out. We are walking into a budget where we need to maintain our prudence, and we need to prepare not just for the short term, but the medium and long term. And so with that, reserves continue to matter. And that's why we are committed to increasing our reserves pursuant to the rules and regulations established under Prop 2, but also under the rules of engagement as it relates to addressing the issues of resilience and prudence and volatility. Just a reminder, in January, we set out record reserves in the January budget of 35.6. Importantly, you will see here an increase of $1.6 billion in reserves in the May revise. So we're going up, not down, in total number of reserves. That's primarily represented in the rainy day fund for public education, pursuant to Prop 98, Prop 2, and its relationship. We could talk more about that, but there are more resources in that bucket. We have hit the statutory 10% on the rainy day fund, so that's capped, and there's a spillover that we are putting into our retirement liabilities, meaning paying them down, PERS and unfunded healthcare liability. You'll see an increase from the January budget. Here's the January budget. The past 4 years, $10.1 billion we've invested in paying down these retirement liabilities. I don't know of another jurisdiction in the country that's invested this kind of money in terms of paying down its retirement liabilities. In the next 4 years, you'll see that number increase from $7.1 to $7.4 billion. In the budget year, you'll see that increase. I'll go back from $1.9 billion to $2.3. So an additional $400 million in paying down retirement liabilities. You stack those two, it's about $2 billion of additional investment into holding the line, paying down long-term liabilities, and addressing our needs, potential needs, if we enter into a recession, to be able to pull the trigger on the rainy day fund and bolstering the broader rainy day funds, including education. But here's foundationally what I want to reinforce, and we'll move through this. Will be a much quicker presentation than in the past.